Okay, I believe we are live. Hello, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to this special screening of the Israel Lobby USA. This program is sponsored by several organizations, and I'd like to thank them all. That includes Verso Books, Palestine Legal, Jewish Voice for Peace, the Adalah Justice Project, and the Institute for Policy Studies. My name is Fawn. And what you're about to see is a program that was produced by an Al Jazeera investigative team that was planned to air around 2017 and 2018. However, it never aired on Al Jazeera following some lobbying efforts by the Israel lobby, either ironically or predictably. And there was a lot of pressure put on the government of Qatar. And there was a lot of involvement with a former Jewish aide to Ted Cruz, Nicholas Mullen, who later became a lobbyist for the Qatari government, as well as the involvement of the Zionist Organization of America, and also Alan Dershowitz and a lot of other shady characters. Of course, Alan Dershowitz would want you to know that he kept his underwear on the whole time. The film is a little over 1 hour long, and following that, we will have a panel discussion with Sumaya Awad from the Adalah Justice Project, Liz Jackson from Palestine Legal, Noah Kulwin from Blowback Podcast, and Corey Peterson Smith from the Institute for Policy Studies. So stay tuned for that. That will be following this live airing of the censored Israel Lobby program, so that's 1 hour. And then after the 1 hour showing, we will cut straight into the live panel discussion. Now, I have with me Karen Holmes, who was involved in the creation of this documentary. She was an organizer and researcher involved in it, and I'd like her to just say a few words and introduce this. So please, Karen.
Thank you so much to the Verso team and to you specifically, Fawn, for coordinating the screening. You said it all so well, but just a really brief background on the film. In 2016, Al Jazeera sent undercover reporter James Kleinfeld to intern and network in the Israel lobby in Washington, D.C. Using a hidden camera, he filmed the lobby efforts to target, surveil, and smear advocates for Palestinian liberation. After pressure from the very lobby that the series was investigating, Al Jazeera censored the documentary. So while the film was never formally released, it was leaked online and hosted by Electronic Intifada. From the original 4 hour series, I created this subject-specific cut to highlight the Israel lobby's efforts to target Palestine activism on U.S. college campuses. I've shown this cut on campuses around the country with hopes that people better understand the counterinsurgent strategies being levied against this incredibly important freedom work. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the film, and thank you to Verso.
Thanks a lot, Karen. Once again, the film will last 1 hour, and following that, please stay on to watch the panel discussion. So with that in mind, here we go.
Using an undercover reporter, Al Jazeera's investigative unit infiltrates one of the most powerful lobbies in the world.
Getting $38 billion in security aid to Israel matters, which is what AIPAC just did.
We examine how the lobby, led by AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has secured unwavering support in Congress.
Congressmen don't do anything unless you pressure them. And the only way to do that is with money.
What the lobby is all about is to make sure that Israel gets special treatment from the United States forever.
But after occupying Palestinian lands for half a century, the pro-Israel lobby is facing a new challenge.
We called for a full boycott of Israel, divesting from it, and eventually imposing sanctions on it to achieve UN-stipulated rights of the Palestinian people.
A movement to boycott, divest, and impose sanctions on Israel, BDS, was formed on American campuses.
Seems to be achieving its goals, threatens future American support for Israel.
We believe in justice for all people. So that means the occupation has to end.
Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs responded with a covert operation to defeat BDS.
אתה צריך לעשות את זה עם הרבה מאוד עמימות. זה לא גוף צבאי היררכי שאם הרגנו את X, אז כל הגוף מתחתיו לא פועל.
So the Israeli government leverages Jewish organizations in the diaspora.
Absolutely.
It's a psychological campaign involving spying and smears.
You discredit the messenger as a way of discrediting the message.
Just stay on message. And what is that message? BDS is a hate movement.
While our reporter monitored pro-Israel groups, he was asked to go undercover for the lobby.
You're going into enemy territory. It's not for everybody.
Our undercover reporter, Tony, is British and Jewish and had recently graduated from the University of Oxford. He wrote articles and presented himself as a strong supporter of Israel. In Washington, he attended a course on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
I'm from the UK, and I'm just taking a course at Georgetown here over the summer.
He networked in the social circles of the pro-Israel lobby.
Hi, I'm Rona.
I'm Tony.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you. I'm good. Good to see you. Hey.
After building his profile, Tony was accepted on a training course in pro-Israel advocacy.
Welcome to Fuel for Truth DC's second boot camp. Congratulations, everyone, to being accepted. What we're going to do right now is just kind of like introduce ourselves. I'm Daniel.
In role-play workshops, they were instructed how to respond to criticism of Israel.
Can I have a volunteer? Apartheid walls cutting off Palestine. Boycott Israel. Divest from Israel. Sanction companies that do business with Israel.
It's kind of odd that you call it a wall, given that like 90% of it is fence.
This is a photo. I see a wall.
Why can't Israel do more to help, Tony?
Our undercover reporter played the role of pro-Israel advocate.
Israel is doing a lot to help the Palestinians. I say actually Israel is doing all the best that they can, but you know, it's a tough situation.
Businesses in Gaza can't freely send their trucks into Israel to sell their goods.
I think you'll find that that's actually a misconception. They do allow their trucks, and what they don't allow is dangerous material.
Okay, stop.
After the course, Tony was accepted as a volunteer at a pro-Israel communications group called the Israel Project.
It's Tony Kleinfeld. Kleinfeld. Like Seinfeld, but with a K.
The Israel Project, known as TIP, describes itself on its promotion.
Hi, everybody. We've got some reports that's a little bit choppy, so I'm going to reset the video a little bit, and we're going to start right again, and I think that will solve the issue of the choppy video. So let's try it again here.
Using an undercover reporter, Al Jazeera's investigative unit infiltrates one of the most powerful lobbies in the world.
Getting $38 billion in security aid to Israel matters, which is what AIPAC is doing.
We examine how the lobby, led by AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has secured unwavering support in Congress.
Congressmen don't do anything unless you question them. And the only way to do that is with money.
What the lobby is all about is to make sure that Israel gets special treatment from the United States forever.
But after occupying Palestinian lands for half a century, the pro-Israel lobby is facing a new challenge.
We called for a full boycott of Israel, divesting from it, and eventually imposing sanctions on it to achieve UN-stipulated rights of the Palestinian people.
A movement to boycott, divest, and impose sanctions on Israel, BDS, was formed on American campuses.
Seems to be achieving its goals, threatens future American support for Israel.
We believe in justice for all people. So that means the occupation has to end.
Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs responded with a covert operation to defeat BDS.
אתה צריך לעשות את זה עם הרבה מאוד עמימות. זה לא גוף צבאי היררכי שאם הרגנו את X, אז כל הגוף מתחתיו לא פועל.
So the Israeli government leverages Jewish organizations in the diaspora.
Absolutely.
It's a psychological campaign involving spying and smears.
You discredit the messenger as a way of discrediting the message.
Just stay on message. And what is that message? BDS is a hate movement.
While our reporter monitored pro-Israel groups, he was asked to go undercover for the lobby.
You're going into enemy territory. It's not for everybody.
Our undercover reporter, Tony, is British and Jewish and had recently graduated from the University of Oxford. He wrote articles and presented himself as a strong supporter of Israel. In Washington, he attended a course on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
I'm from the UK, and I'm just taking a course at Georgetown here over the summer.
He networked in the social circles of the pro-Israel lobby.
Hi, I'm Rona.
I'm Tony.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you. I'm good. Good to see you. Hey.
After building his profile, Tony was accepted on a training course in pro-Israel advocacy.
Welcome to Fuel for Truth DC's second boot camp. Congratulations, everyone, to being accepted. What we're going to do right now is just kind of like introduce ourselves. I'm Daniel.
In role-play workshops, they were instructed how to respond to criticism of Israel.
Can I have a volunteer? Apartheid walls cutting off Palestine. Boycott Israel. Divest from Israel. Sanction companies that do business with Israel.
It's kind of odd to call it a wall, given that like 90% of it is events.
This is a photo. I see a wall.
Why can't Israel do more to help, Tony?
Our undercover reporter played the role of pro-Israel advocate.
Israel's doing a lot to help the Palestinians. I say actually Israel is doing all the best that they can, but it's a tough situation.
The businesses in Gaza can't freely send their trucks into Israel to sell their goods.
I think you'll find that that's actually a misconception. They do allow their trucks, and what they don't allow is dangerous material.
Okay, stop.
After the course, Tony was accepted as a volunteer at a pro-Israel communications group called the Israel Project.
It's Tony Kleinfeld. Kleinfeld. Like Seinfeld, but with a K.
The Israel Project, known as TIP, describes itself on its promotional videos as a strategic communications group.
At TIP, we believe we've found the answer. Israel's enemies have left the battlefield of the Middle East and are now fighting on the battlefield of public opinion.
TIP's online promotion claims it shapes the way Israel is framed in the international media.
TIP changes the way thousands of media reports appear every year. And then we add platforms of our own, getting people talking, taking command of the conversations.
Weeks before he started, Tony discussed with a senior manager how TIP deals with the media.
Things that you do loudly. A lot of them are things you do behind the scenes. The basic messages on the following BDS means essentially kind of a hate group targeting Israel. They're anti-peace. We try not to even use the term just because it builds their brand. We just refer to boycotters. The goal is to actually make things happen and to figure out what are the means of communication to do that.
In 2005, Palestinian civil rights groups sought a peaceful means to protest against Israel's occupation. They identified goods from Israel and called for their boycott. The BDS movement was born.
BDS adopted a nonviolent strategy because we think it is morally consistent and very effective against an enemy that is extremely powerful militarily. We called for boycotting Israel, divesting from it, and eventually imposing sanctions on it, as was done against apartheid South Africa, to achieve basic Palestinian rights under international law.
Free Palestine! Long live!
Over the past decade, BDS has grown around the world. By campaigning for Palestinian civil rights in land controlled by Israel, BDS believes it has exposed a deficiency in the moral defense of the Jewish state. Tony had gathered that the lobby's concern with BDS was not its economic impact, but a much wider threat to the power of the pro-Israel lobby.
The specific potential of an immediate boycott, that's not a problem. It's a bigger problem is the Democratic Party, the Bernie Sanders people, bringing all these anti-Israel people, and the Democratic Party being pro-Israel is less of a bipartisan issue. And then, every time the White House changes, policies towards Israel change, and that becomes a dangerous thing for Israel. There is an actually important battle being fought on the campus.
The Israel on Campus Coalition is a coordinating group at the front line of the battle against BDS.
We built up this massive national political campaign to crush them and to fight back and to fight fire with fire. What we saw was a growing global movement to destroy Israel that was manifesting on American college campuses. It makes sense that they would try to poison the next generation. The one thing every member of Congress and president and ambassador and newspaper editor has in common is, by and large, they spent a little bit of time on a college campus, and probably those were formative years.
The Israel on Campus Coalition is at the center of the lobby's response to BDS.
There are about 100, maybe 120 now professionals that are working for a dozen national ICC partner organizations like AIPAC and Hazara Fellowships and Stand With Us and Hillel and Chabad and API.
The Israel on Campus Coalition, they really oversee like the whole movement. They're sort of the ones that like have the bird's eye view. Let's just say like next week, a BDS resolution comes to campus. So the ICC will be the ones, they'll organize a conference call with all the partners. So they might say, okay, stand with us, we need a little bit more of your help because we need something regarding like what's in the BDS resolution. The campus newspaper wants us to write like an op-ed, can you guys help like the op-ed? So they'll sort of be the ones and they'll sort of be overseeing it.
Stand With Us and the ICC have a particularly close relationship. Stand With Us holds an annual conference in Los Angeles. Its focus is on how to fight the BDS movement.
To reveal the true nature of BDS, a venomous, deceitful, anti-peace, anti-coexistence movement that will settle for nothing short of the annihilation of the Jewish state.
Jacob Bain from the Israel on Campus Coalition linked BDS to the rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes in America.
Anti-Semitism is increasing in general, right? In the same way that we're seeing anti-Semitism increase in the community, we're seeing these awful, terrifying desecrations of Jewish cemeteries. Campus is no exception.
At the Israel on Campus Coalition in Washington, Tony discovered that the lobby is deliberately adopting a clandestine approach on campuses.
We should stand behind our work, not in front of it. It's not helpful for Stand With Us to say to a pro-Israel student, or the Israel Project to say to a pro-Israel student, oh, sure, we'll help you, but you have to put our logo on it. We're working like so closely with Stand With Us, and we have such a tight partnership with them today that like it's totally seamless.
Tony also discovered that anonymity is a key strand of the campaign against BDS.
If one of these terrorists on campus wants to disrupt a pro-Israel lecture or something and like unfurl a banner or whatever else, we're going to investigate them, look into bad stuff they've done. That stuff becomes very useful in the moment, and there are any number of ways to push it out. The only thing is that we do it securely and anonymously, and that's the key.
It was a Sunday. I was in the kitchen. My partner was in the living room with my daughter. Came in with her laptop, and she said, "You've got to see this."
Bill Mullen has been a campaigner for the BDS movement for years. His wife had been sent a link to a website containing a letter addressed to her.
This letter purported to be by a former student who said that she had been sexually harassed by me, and she had found other students at Purdue who had had the same experience, and she was writing this letter to tell their story.
With the anti-Israel people, what's most effective, what we found, at least in the last year, is you do the opposition research, put up some anonymous website, and then put up targeted Facebook ads.
Within a very short time, within about 48 hours, we were able to establish that these multiple sites that we had found attacking me had been taken out almost at the same time, and that they were clearly the work of the same people.
Every few hours, you drip out a new piece of the opposition research. It's psychological warfare. Drives them crazy.
One of the accounts said that in the process of supposedly putting my hand on her, I'd invited her to a Palestine organizational meeting. And I thought, well, you're sort of putting your cards on the table there, whoever you are. We found out that a student at Purdue, who I work with, had also been targeted.
A former activist with Students for Justice in Palestine agreed to speak only with her face concealed.
It said that I would get drunk and go and have sex with multiple guys, and that's just a huge attack on my character and a massive lie. My parents were very upset. They immediately told me to quit my involvement with SJP.
They either shut down or they spend time responding to it and investigating it, which is time they can't spend attacking Israel. That's incredibly effective.
The main focus was to attack my reputation and my character, pretty much to mess with me so that I don't want to continue my involvement with SJP.
Could you send me some of these websites? I'd be very curious just to see what they look like.
I couldn't.
You couldn't, okay.
But, you know, Canary Mission is a good example. Canary Mission is highly, highly effective to the extent that we monitor the Students for Justice in Palestine and their allies.
A few years later, these individuals are applying for jobs within your company.
Canary Mission's promotional video threatens to pass these smears onto prospective employers.
To ensure that today's radicals are not tomorrow's employees.
Somebody did contact my employer and ask for me to be fired based on my pro-Palestine activism. They said that, you know, if they continued to employ me, that their values are anti-Semitic. It can be really scary at first. I was mostly harassed via Twitter. They were tweeting me like every 2 or 3 days. They take screenshots, even way back to my Facebook pictures that don't even look like me anymore. Just digging and digging through my online presence.
They're terrified of Canary Mission, and it's about time.
We had always been afraid of ending up on there. It was like very personal. They see us as such a threat that they have to kind of twist and turn and delve into our personal lives. As if they were trying to scare us into stopping our work. Their Twitter campaign is relentless.
Every picture that I post on Facebook, it goes onto one of their websites with every tweet that I put in. Every hashtag I post on Instagram, it goes into one of their files.
As he left his meeting at the ICC, Tony reflected on the way Jacob Boehm had reacted to his questions about Canary Mission.
We do it securely and anonymously, and that's the key.
It sounds very similar to like a Canary Mission and that kind of thing. Is that,
yeah.
Are you guys like in touch with them at all, or is there any kind of, no?
No, Canary Mission is totally anonymous.
Yes. Yeah,
it's hard to figure out who's behind it. Canary Mission is highly, highly effective to the extent that we monitor the Students for Justice in Palestine and their allies. We're doing it back. I mean, not we, but this some anonymous group.
We don't know who's behind it. I would ask where they get their money from, because ultimately that tells you where the control is.
Our undercover reporter, Tony, is having a coffee with Eric, his boss at the Israel Project. Tony wanted to find out more about Canary Mission.
There's a guy named Adam Milstein who you might want to meet. He's a convicted felon. That's a bad way to describe him. He's a real estate mogul. When I was working with him when I was at APAC, I was literally emailing back and forth with him while he was in jail. But he's loaded. I mean, he's close to $500 million.
Adam Milstein has become a central figure in the lobby. His foundation funds numerous pro-Israel organizations. He also sits on the boards of AIPAC's National Council, the Israel on Campus Coalition, and Stand With Us. Our reporter filmed him alongside Jacob Boehm from the Israel on Campus Coalition at the Stand With Us conference in Los Angeles. The two men had lengthy private discussions. Tony attended the Israeli-American Council's annual conference. At a party, he spotted the IAC's chairman, Adam Milstein.
I'm Tony, I'm in the Israel Project with Eric Gallagher.
Milstein told Tony how critics of Israel should be handled.
First of all, investigate who they are, what's their agenda. They're picking on the Jews because it's easy, because it's popular. We need to expose what they really are, and we need to expose the fact that they're everything we believe in. And we need to put them on the run. Right now, they can do whatever they like, terrorize us, and we are...
How do we put them on the run, though?
Doing it by exposing who they are, what they are, the fact that they're racist, the fact that they're bigoted, that they're down in democracy.
Eric said wealthy pro-Israel donors now have the freedom to fight Israel's critics however they want.
In this country, you have these billionaire types who are starting to realize, like, oh wow, I don't need to participate in the Republican or Democratic parties. I could build my own apparatus and have influence from Los Angeles or Detroit. And Al Milstein's one of those guys. And he funds the Israel Project. He does a lot of great work.
Eric then made a remarkable claim when Tony asked about Canary Mission.
Who are the people involved with them?
It's him. It's him.
Adam Milstein.
Yeah, I don't know who he hired to oversee it. Adam Milstein. He's the guy who funds it.
We need to expose the fact that they're everything we believe in. We need to put them on the run.
So Adam Milstein, he funds the Israel Project and he's funding the Canary Mission website.
Yeah, which is interesting because it makes it seem as though we're a part of it, but we're not. Actually, I was involved with the effort to start the Name and Shame. He called a group of us to ask us what we thought. I told him actually I thought it was a bad idea, but he did anyway. There's no one on their side doing it, so you don't have to worry about your reputation.
They've lost the political argument. They can now do nothing but resort to personal smears against us. They can't engage us in discussions of the occupation. They can't defend apartheid. They can't defend the bombings in Gaza, but they can try to destroy our lives.
The lobby hope that a new partnership with Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs will become a game changer in the fight against BDS.
The Ministry of Strategic Affairs brings together this group called the Global Coalition for Israel. And it's like leading pro-Israel advocacy groups around the world. My view and the view of Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which we coordinate with sometimes, or we communicate with sometimes, is like Europe is lost and it's basically over. And like they're turning a lot of attention now to the US because they feel we're on your path.
The secretive Ministry of Strategic Affairs, based in the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem, was given a mission: establish a covert campaign to defeat the BDS movement. The campaign includes monitoring the activities of American students.
We use all sorts of technology. We use corporate level, enterprise grade social media intelligence software. Almost all of this happens on social media. So we have custom algorithms and formulae that acquire the stuff immediately.
We are a different government working on foreign soil, and we have to be very, very cautious. We have 3 different sub-campaigns which are very, very sensitive regarding data gathering, information analysis, working on activist organization, money trail. This is something that only a country with its resources can do the best. If we want to win, we have to change our ways. We have to think differently. And this is waging a holistic campaign against the other side. Take him out of his comfort zone. Make him be on the defensive.
In the United States, the lobby is working with Israel to spy on American citizens.
We're giving them data. For example, one day, Sima's deputy is sending me a photo, just a photo in WhatsApp. It's written, boycott Israel on a billboard. In a few hours, our systems and analysts could find the exact organization, people, and even their names where they live. We gave it back to the ministry. I have no idea what I did with this. But in fact, 3 days later, there were no billboards.
Our undercover reporter was attending a dinner at the annual conference of the Israeli-American Council in Washington. The 3-day conference brings together the constellation of pro-Israel lobby groups in the US. On the surface, things seem to be looking good for Israel.
Israel's booming. It's the startup nation. More venture capital is going into Israel today than at any other time in history. So why don't we just calm down, realize that BDS is worthless, it's losing, and ignore it. I don't think BDS was ever supposed to be about getting colleges to take their money out of Israel. So if we focus on the dollars, we could feel really good about ourselves. If we focus on the fact that an effort's being made to distance us, those who love Israel, from the rising generation, I think we need to worry. When you get to the millennials and the students, it's a bad situation. And it's getting to the point now where the majority is more favorable towards the Palestinians than the Israelis.
While numerous speakers discussed ways to combat BDS, the lack of civil rights for Palestinians living under Israeli control was not raised.
Nobody talks about the reason why BDS exists at all. What's the model for the BDS movement? The model is South Africa. So, was that a bad thing to do?
An apartheid regime which denied equal rights to black South Africans was weakened and ultimately collapsed after a global economic and political boycott.
They're worried that the BDS movement will get to the stature that the South Africa boycott got to. So they're trying to stop it now.
In order to discredit the apartheid label, the lobby has launched a campaign to try to co-opt black South Africans.
Black South Africans who were apartheid activists, who were brought to Israel, saw the reality, came home angry at BDS. They felt lied to. They felt that someone had tried to steal their narrative. This is an effective tool. Bringing these black South African, former BDS activists, now Israel supporters to American campuses.
During his volunteership, Tony learned that the Israel Project has been developing a strategy called Stop Stealing My Apartheid. The plan is to feed articles written by black South Africans into the American media, claiming that BDS has distorted their history.
If you're disgusted by segregation in this country, if you're disgusted by South African apartheid, then you should also be disgusted by Israeli apartheid.
Another workshop was addressed by Israeli diplomats from consulates in the US. Black Lives Matter had attracted particular criticism after voicing support for the BDS movement. It appears that Israel's diplomats may be trying to challenge the apartheid label by canvassing support amongst African Americans.
The major problem of Israel is with the young generation of the black community. Black Lives Matter starts there. I had last week a sit-down dinner at my house with 40 people, which are considered the leadership of the black community, and it's very important people. They can be part of our doing an activity.
Pro-Israel groups are trying to cultivate a new generation of black leaders that is pro-Israel by bringing them to AIPAC conferences on all expenses paid trips, by taking them on delegations to Israel.
They're doing that because they're afraid of BDS and they're afraid of Black Lives Matter, which is this new struggle for black freedom that also sees black freedom as situated in a larger context. In 2014, Israel launched a siege of Gaza. In the same summer, police in Ferguson killed Mike Brown, and Ferguson rose up. And on the news at night, there would be both the latest out of Gaza and the latest out of Ferguson. There was solidarity that was expressed online with the Ferguson uprising. There were Palestinians who took to Twitter to cheer on the rebels of Ferguson and explain how to deal with tear gas.
Israel's diplomats have responded by evoking the legacy of Martin Luther King, claiming that the campaign for Palestinian civil rights bears no resemblance to the civil rights movement in America.
Dr. Clarence B. Jones, who wrote the draft speech for Martin Luther King, I had a dream. He was his lawyer, he was his close friend. He's somebody that I reached out to. He became a very close and personal friend. Because of that relationship, he published 3 articles at the Huffington Post explaining why their agenda was hijacked. Martin Luther King will turn in his grave if he saw the anti-Israel tendencies or policies that are starting to emerge within Black Lives Matter.
There's something on one hand laughable about it, but there's something also really insidious about this. You're using the credibility of a freedom struggle to try to oppose another freedom struggle. And I think that that's appalling.
Soon after Black Lives Matter declared support for BDS, a fundraiser at a New York nightclub was suddenly cancelled. The venue's management said it didn't approve of the movement's stance on Israel. Tony was told by his boss, Eric, that the Israel Project was behind the decision.
I don't know if you saw, but this club, ditched a Black Lives Matter event. One of our donors, we just put in a call to him, and then he put in a call to the police.
Wow, to shut down this Black Lives Matter event. I think it's really appalling that a system in Israel has devised incredible and comprehensive ways to have a violent regime against Palestinians, that they would also invest resources into making sure to shore up support for that oppression here.
One evening at the IAC conference, Tony met a prominent activist. He's associated with the hardline trend in the pro-Israel lobby. Noah Pollock argues that tough tactics are needed to counter the apartheid label.
The activism has to be very evocative and attention-getting and just total no given. We're going to be more pro-Israel than you can even imagine.
Pollock believes the American public, unlike those in Britain, will accept his gloves-off strategy.
The majority of Americans are pro-Israel. Whereas if you take the poll of Israel in the UK, it's just pure hatred of Israel. Your country, basically let half of Pakistan move in, So you have a different problem than we do here.
There is an actual direct connection between the people who were involved in raising money for Hamas and people who are involved in BDS activism on American campuses today.
Pollock claims that SJP is just a front to hide the real agenda of American Muslims for Palestine.
You'll notice their name is Students for Justice in Palestine. You don't hear the word Islamic, you don't hear the word Muslim in that name, and you hear the word justice, which is kind of a buzzword on campuses today. Everyone's for justice, right? You're not for injustice. The crowd that's kind of behind the scenes is actually a very Islamic radical cause. And if you actually get into the weeds on SJP, they've aligned with groups that are for not just the destruction of Israel, the destruction of America.
Pollock even accuses Jewish supporters of BDS of being in league with Hamas.
Which is Jewish Voice for Peace, or as I call it, Jewish Voice for Hamas. It'd be like having a group called African Americans for Slavery. It's crazy, right? A lot of the JVP people are not Jewish. They've had a real problem of people basically pretending to be Jews because the anti-Israel activism it's a little more sexy.
You're here speaking with the rabbi. I work for Jewish Voice for Peace. We're a Jewish organization. Again, I think that's another kind of absurd claim.
When you talk about SJP and when you talk about BDS, you talk about them as a hate group, as a movement that absolutely endorses violence against civilians, not military conflict, but violence against civilians.
aka terrorism. You discredit the messenger as a way of discrediting the message.
Tony was told of a demonstration that Noah Pollock was organizing. A bus took protesters to an event organized by the pro-BDS movement, Students for Justice in Palestine.
Hey man, I'm Tony. Marshall. Nice to meet you.
This is one of those things where either it's going to be amazing and we're going to defeat BDS, or we're just broken.
Well, you can't beat them, join them.
The protesters are on a fellowship program run by a conservative think tank called the Hoover Institution.
The whole fellowship is extravagant. Like, you guys are being like foot soldiers of conservative movement. This is actually the first foot soldier activity that I think we've been forced to do. Tony, what's your connection to the conspiracy that we're all part of?
Yeah, the Israel Project.
So you can't not come.
Their plan is to disrupt the National Conference of Students for Justice in Palestine. Marshall said that the pro-Israel protest had been poorly planned.
It's a very fly-by-the-pants procedure. It was basically just like Noah Pollock coming and being like, look, there are these jihadis who basically support suicide bombing, and they're at a campus, and you have to stop them.
Is there a chance to shout at Arabs?
As we're leaving, we mentioned to our boss yesterday that we're going. She's like, oh yeah, that's mandatory. You need to go.
While they've been told they have to take part in the protest, not everyone on the bus is convinced it's good for their reputation.
Do you know what my worst nightmare is? I'm actually not kidding. It's a photo of Dion and I together. And we're just like clearly identifiable. And they're like, oh, who are these like traders who sold out to the Jewish conspiracy for money? I'm like, we did. We cost $50,000 plus benefits.
As the bus leaves, they discuss whether there's any point in staging the protest.
I'm just skeptical.
Of using the protesting tactic against them?
Because that's not our demographic. They don't like. The reason protests work is when like the people involved really care about it and like want to be there.
When a protest is sponsored and organized by outsiders, but made to appear like a popular grassroots movement, it's known as astroturfing.
So they did a really job of getting me excited to show up and protest.
It's kind of the way you're putting it kind of sounds a bit like astroturfing.
No. This is astroturfing. No, this is actually the definition. There's a bus.
What does that mean?
So it's when you set up things.
It's the difference between grassroots and astroturf.
It's not that astroturfing is wrong. It's just that like your astroturf has to be like committed.
The bus arrives at George Mason University, where Students for Justice in Palestine is holding its national conference. But the protesters can't find the conference hall.
We should just pull over and ask, hey, where are all the jihadis?
The driver sees two students and stops to ask directions. One is wearing a headscarf.
Oh, no. Come on. We're like, back to DC! Back to DC!
I believe the comments.
No.
Excuse me? Do you know where the Johnson Center is? Okay, just like go back down this. Okay, thank you.
That was problematic.
So this is off to a good start.
Students for Justice in Palestine really is a student-led type of organization focused around promoting the BDS cause. We have workshops on how to run a divestment campaign, finding intersections on campus, building alliances. Right now, Palestine has been essentially normalized on campuses.
The bus finally arrives.
Jen.
Noah Pollock's protest is not a student event. To avoid breaking university regulations, he's arranged a legal briefing.
The SJP conference is on the 3rd floor, and we're going to go up and in a respectful and quiet way protest them. Yael is a legal expert and is going to talk a little bit about that.
We are here, of course, as guests of the university. So we don't want to be accused of disrupting a school-sponsored activity. It is against the law to use abusive or violent language. So we're going to use peaceful, good language. If we see that they're doing anything that is bad behavior, don't engage, remain calm. If you do happen to speak with any reporters, just stay on message. And what is that message? SJP is a hate group. BDS is a hate movement. The only other thing you probably want to mention is that SJP endorses violence, terrorism, things like that. And you guys are going to be great.
We're not there to provoke. We're not there to have any sort of incident at all. We're nice people.
We start seeing groups of people coming towards us who don't seem familiar, and then brandishing Israel flags and then posters and signs.
Tony joined the demonstration.
No. Support democratic society. But if you don't want to, SJP, what do you think of this?
You agree? Resistance? Child suicide bombers?
How do you respond to such a wild accusation that's not grounded in anything and that's just designed to shift attention? Oh wait, we support suicide bombers. That's ridiculous.
Before that,
social justice left supports radical terrorism.
You don't want dialogue? We're here to talk to you. Turn your back.
You'd think if like they were gonna do it, they'd try to shake it up and mix it up with new accusations.
We don't support radical Islamic terrorism in this country. We don't support suicide bombers. Cowards who kill children and women. They leave orphans. We don't support that.
Kill babies in strollers. That'll bring peace. Yeah, Palestinian terrorists all over Israel. That would be it.
Real baby killers, these terrorists. They kill women, they kill children, they don't care about anything.
Rape women too, all the time.
It takes a lot to hear this and not respond, and to turn your back to them and to not look back at them.
Thank you, SJP. Good luck with your jihad.
They were very frustrated at the fact that we weren't responding. They're saying, they're not even responding. They're not even responding.
Yeah, look at how they wave a Palestinian flag at our country. Look at this. Despicable. These are the real basket of deplorables. These are the deplorables, people. They cower behind radical Islamism. They don't engage in dialogue because they can't win the war of ideas.
There's no responding to our content, because there is no refuting our content. Our content is grounded in human rights, morality, ethics, international law.
The staged protest had minimal impact on the students at George Mason University. But the headlines shared on social media tell the story Pollock wanted.
Yeah, let's head back to headquarters for debriefing and cocktails.
Tony was attending a party run by an advocacy group that he'd joined. A journalist then approached him with an extraordinary proposition. He wanted Tony to work undercover for the lobby at a meeting of BDS activists.
For the Allgemeiner, so we're trying to recruit someone to go undercover just to go there and just see what's going on. And I think the person would get paid for it too. Yeah. Someone's gonna sign up, do that profile, just kind of like see what's going on. Higher up, you know, they sent an email today that like, you know anyone who can do this. For some reason, he popped into my head.
A few days later, a journalist from the Allgemeiner contacted Tony.
It would be undercover and have to be kept pretty quiet. We would like to have some recording device on your person. Any level of potential danger or, difficulty, violence or verbal assault, none of that concerns you or puts you off?
No, because I think I'm pretty good at just being kind of zen in the face of verbal assaults.
The Allgemeiner claims to be the fastest growing Jewish newspaper in America. It pays particular attention to events on college campuses.
We're working on a project now about ranking U.S. universities and colleges in terms of their anti-Semitic and anti-Israel activity. We have a campus bureau that monitors this sort of behavior and these incidents and these campaigns all day long, all week long.
The Allgemeine often reports that anti-Semitism exists amongst pro-Palestinian student groups.
The language that comes from those arenas move into that sphere of the new anti-Semitism, which is anti-Israelism. And that's a big focus at the Campus Bureau, looking at the blurring of those lines and where those boundaries have eroded. As journalists, right, exposure is the goal, exposing truth.
A short time later, the Allgemeine contacted Tony once more to discuss his proposed mission to work undercover at a BDS event. The editor explained what they wanted.
One of the projects that we've been looking to do for quite a while is to try and infiltrate some of these groups, get undercover and discover what they're about from the inside. You explain the war, it's a hostile environment and there's some risk involved. The goal would really be to uncover any evidence of not just bias, but, real bigotry. The correlation between the BDS movement and hatred of Jews.
Tony is given a list of persons of interest. They're all on the Canary Mission website.
Go to canarymission.org. Have you heard of Canary Mission?
A little bit. Could you tell me about it?
People who hate it, the people who are being targeted by it, call it a blacklist. You have names here that show up on this database. Students and professors, faculty, speakers, organizations that have ties to terrorism, outright ties to terrorism, or terrorists who have called for the destruction of the Jewish state.
Despite running Canary Mission's Tennessee expose, the Allgemeine staff say Canary's identity is still a mystery.
It's an anonymous site. Nobody has any idea who's actually running this thing, and people have tried and looked into it.
If you're on board in terms of concept, then I guess the next thing we just need to figure out is the money. Can we wait for a follow-up email from you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I should get that to you within the next 24 hours.
In August 2016, a story in the Allgemeine caused waves in Washington's pro-Israel circles.
The thing that I'm working on, you might have seen the news recently about a cesspool of anti-Semitism at the University of Tennessee. So the expose was on these anti-Semitic tweets. They uncovered 14 current students, 5 recent graduates at the University of Tennessee that have tweeted all of these horribly anti-Semitic things.
The evidence was released by an anonymous group within the pro-Israel lobby.
They're called Canary Mission.
The University of Tennessee is based in Knoxville, a quiet city in the east of the state. Tennessee is conservative and religious. The Christian church has political influence here. 6 out of 10 voters opted for Donald Trump. At the university, students and professors, including opponents of BDS, were taken aback by the headlines.
It said that there was rampant anti-Semitism at the University of Tennessee. This was quite a shock. It was very surreal and strange. I didn't see anything happening on the ground. It all seemed to be internet-based.
There's this international headline with our names and this defamation of our characters. It was the last thing that we were expecting to happen.
I was surprised that they were targeting the University of Tennessee. I mean, there's just not a whole lot going on in Knoxville. It just seems such a benign target.
Several tweets were clear-cut examples of anti-Semitism. Some failed to distinguish between Jewish people and the State of Israel. Others made vile references to the horrors of the Holocaust.
There were definitely some very anti-Semitic things said, but it seemed to be by a limited number of students.
Those tweets are horrible, and that should not be supported by anybody.
One of the students, there were tweets from when they were 14, 15, and 16 years old. People do and say stupid things. I was really horrified that you had essentially this blacklist of students.
Shortly after being named by Canary Mission, posters and flyers linked BDS supporters to Hamas.
There was a list of most of the names of the students that were mentioned in the Canary Mission. All I kept seeing were flyers all over the place. Like, they'll put it on cars, they'll put it on side tables in the student centers and stuff like that.
That kind of scared me, to think that there are actually people physically on campus posting these things.
Back in Washington, Aviva is drafting a letter to the University of Tennessee on behalf of the Brandeis Center. They want the university to take a stand.
We're telling them that basically they need to issue a stronger statement. They need to investigate the students that were involved. They need to offer education and training.
In addition to drawing attention to those responsible for anti-Semitic tweets, their orchestrated release served another purpose. It's part of a wider campaign by the pro-Israel lobby.
The problem right now, I think, on universities is that administrations don't realize that anti-Israel statements or anti-Zionist statements often are also anti-Semitic.
To find out what anti-Semitism means for the lobby, Tony visits Aviva's boss at the Brandeis Center for Human Rights in Washington. Despite its name, it's a pro-Israel lobby group.
Hi. It's great to finally meet you.
Really good to meet you.
Kenneth Marcus is involved in the lobby's attempt to redefine anti-Semitism in a way that could include criticism of the State of Israel.
The goal is to have the federal government to establish a definition of anti-Semitism that is parallel to the State Department definition.
The US State Department defines anti-Semitism using a three-point test known as the 3 Ds. It includes statements that demonize Israel, those that apply double standards, or those that delegitimize the state.
There have been attempts by some to try to define anti-Semitism in such a way that conflates actual anti-Semitism with completely legitimate criticism of Israel or Israeli government policies. They are overly broad and vague to the point where any kind of criticism of Israel or of Israeli government policies can be labeled as anti-Semitic.
The letter that Aviva was sending called for the University of Tennessee, Knoxville to address a long-standing problem of anti-Semitism on campus. The Brandeis Center is urging American universities to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that could include criticism of Israel.
We are trying to get universities to adopt a uniform definition, whether it's the State Department's definition or a similar version of it, because then we think that the administrators would be able to understand anti-Semitism better and discipline students for hateful and discriminatory actions.
In 2015, Tennessee became the first state legislature to condemn BDS. It's the result of the lobby's attempt to use legal means to quell BDS on campus.
In recent light of anti-Semitic things that have happened here in Tennessee on our college campuses, we are just expressing our support as an ally for the State of Israel. And with that, I renew my motion.
There's an intensive effort by Israel and pro-Israel groups to get governments, universities, legislative bodies to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel and its state ideology, Zionism. According to their definition, if I say to you that I believe that instead of separate Israeli and Palestinian states, there should be a single state where Jews, Christians, Muslims, atheists, everyone has full equal rights, the way they do under the Constitution of the United States. That would make me an anti-Semite because I'm denying Israel's right to be a Jewish state. This has been a key goal of people like Kenneth Marcus and the Brandeis Center, so that they can then go after people who are advocating for equality and bring them up on charges that they're actually anti-Semitic bigots.
You have to show that they're racist hate groups, and that they are using intimidation to get funded and to consistently portray them that way.
6 months after the Allgemeine ran its report, an anti-Semitism awareness bill was brought before Tennessee's State Assembly. The bill incorporates the 3Ds definition, which can include criticism of Israel. Kenneth Marcus gave evidence.
When I had read a newspaper article in a major national Jewish newspaper indicating some issues, we independently verified several different issues going on with blogging, I think it was Facebook entries, Nazi-type references to Jews, and the need to kill Jews. They may have dealt with that, but it seems to me it's an indication that the problem is here.
In order to create enough sort of political momentum and hysteria to get these bills through, you need to show that anti-Semitism is rife on campuses. You see groups like the Brandeis Center jumping on headlines which are very dramatic and very scary. Incidents like the one that they claimed happened at the University of Tennessee are certainly helpful in a political sense if you're trying to push legislation like that through.
A right to exist.
Aviva Vogelstein also traveled to Tennessee.
If a student on a campus says, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, meaning that from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, there will be no state of Israel, that would be considered anti-Semitic. Another example would be when students on campus chant things like, Intifada, Intifada, we support the Intifada. That's calling for, an Intifada is calling for violence against innocent Israeli civilians. And that is an incitement to violence. And it's calling for demonization and delegitimization of Israel.
7 months earlier, when Aviva was writing the letter to the University of Tennessee, she was talking to a leader of the Jewish community in Knoxville. It seems that she told Aviva that the University of Tennessee doesn't have a long-standing problem of anti-Semitism.
She's like, I've been on campus for 10 years, and there have been no, actual incidents of anti-Semitism. These tweets are obviously disgusting and need to be addressed. It's very misleading that they're calling this a cesspool of anti-Semitism.
Jewish students at the University of Tennessee repeated this sentiment before the state legislature.
When people say things like we're experiencing anti-Semitism, it hits us pretty hard. When we were told that this was being said about our university and the climate at our university, we were really confused because we had never heard about any form of anti-Semitism that was happening on our campus. So this was kind of, the first thing to come to us. So if we're the students who are supposed to have been affected by this so-called climate, you would think we would kind of know about it before.
I think it's important to highlight that any allegations that this bill is based off of, those allegations are purely external allegations, meaning they're coming from all over the country except for Tennessee.
One of the consequences of the allegations of anti-Semitism has been to temper activism for Palestinian equal rights.
I would say last year this time, we had a new sort of adrenaline underneath us, and then this kind of completely killed our fire. And it was hard to gain that momentum once again.
After Aviva spoke to Jewish students in Tennessee, she also learned that their greatest concern is unrelated to pro-Palestinian activism.
BDS is not a real movement on the campus. Students for Justice in Palestine, which has a large following nationwide, has very few active student members. And mostly we have problems with Christians trying to proselytize the Jewish students, because in the South everyone is so evangelical.
I find it incredibly troubling that at a time when we see a rise in real broad daylight anti-Semitism in the United States, there are those who claim, oh yeah, we're trying to stop anti-Semitism, but what they're actually trying to do is stop advocacy for Palestinian human rights.
Our investigation into the role of the Israeli state at US campuses led Tony to an employee at the embassy in Washington. She's American, and her job is to analyze BDS activity for the Israeli government.
So nobody really knows what we're doing, but mainly it's been a lot of research, monitoring BDS things and reporting it back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and making sure everyone knows what's going on.
Julia was president of the pro-Israel group at Davis, which is part of the University of California. Davis began as a center for agricultural studies, and its students are known as Aggies.
I came to UC Davis, which had a reputation of being like a really pro-Israel. Now it's like the top 5 most anti-Israel schools in the U.S.
Why is that?
Because of everything that happened in the last few years. It was just particularly bad. And there's a huge Muslim population in Sacramento, which is right next to Davis.
The growing support for the BDS movement in Davis and the lobby's response to it is part of a narrative that's unfolding across America's campuses. Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP, brought a divestment motion before the Student Senate.
I was very, very nervous. The entire room was filled. I think we had about 600 students and people from the community coming in to witness this vote.
I am here today because, quite frankly, I am ashamed. I am ashamed of my university for supporting apartheid genocide of my people in Palestine.
Julia and her pro-Israel allies had already decided that they didn't want a debate.
At 4 a.m. the night before, me and my team were like, "You're gonna lead the walkout." And I was like, "Okay." And they're like, "We're gonna film it just for our own purposes." I was like, "Totally cool." So when everything was happening, like, we went into it knowing we were going to lose. So our strategy was how to, like, ultimately win while losing the vote.
Good evening. My name is Julia Rivkin, and I'm the president of Aggies for Israel.
Students streamed the hearing online. The pro-Israel group also filmed it with another purpose in mind. Their videos would play a key part in the story that was to unfold in the days ahead.
We have been ignored and disrespected year after year, but we have never been silenced. We are a beacon of peace and inclusion on a campus plagued by anti-Semitism. This is our victory. And we who are victorious need not legitimize the words spoken in this empty hearing. So if you are here tonight in opposition to this resolution, I invite you now to stand up, really stand up, and join me in walking out of this room.
Our thought was to control the narratives by having the speech. Like, we wanted it to cause attention. We wanted everyone to see us walking out to show that, like, this doesn't represent us, or shit about this. So that's how we kind of formulated it. That day, all of us released like 50 op-eds in major news sources, so that when people made a hashtag and like a whole thing trending, so when people opened their Facebooks, it wouldn't be them celebrating their victory, it would be us sharing our stories. A student senator who's Muslim made a Facebook status saying, like, Israel will fall, like, Sharia law is taking over Davis, like, we love Hamas, like, that kind of status. So that happened.
We had been called terrorists and told that we were Hamas sympathizers, that we want to bring Sharia law to campus and things like that.
Hi everyone, my name is Azka Fayaz. I'm a second-year political science major.
Azka Fayaz was a committed BDS activist and claims that pro-Israel students repeatedly tried to link her to political violence.
They just came up to me and said, "You're a terrorist. Are you a terrorist? You're gonna bring, you know, terrorism to the student government," and things of that nature.
And vote smart.
I know her. It was ironic. She was directly making a joke of that. When I saw it, though, given the climate at the time, I did grow concerned.
People who were involved, you know, they were like, "Hey, there's actually a lot of negative postings on social media. They're sharing your picture and the cover photo with your caption. It's turning really ugly." That caption was reposted and retweeted over and over and over again. I knew that something big was sort of going to happen.
Pro-Israel students were taunted by pro-Hamas students after an anti-Israel vote passed on campus. Listen and watch. And right after the vote passed, a student senator posted this on Facebook. Hamas and Sharia law have taken over UC Davis, BRB crying over the resilience.
Anger and tension running high at the University of California Davis campus,
What you just saw played out late last week as the Student Government Association voted on a resolution to boycott the Jewish state of Israel.
They kept showing it over and over again. And then they just said that the Muslim students forced the pro-Israel students to leave the room.
Reports say when the Israel supporters tried to object to this vote, the pro-Palestinian students you just saw tried to shout them down with cries of Allahu Akbar.
I invite you now to stand up. Really, stand up. And join me in walking out of the room.
Of course, we know that they left willingly, and they stated that they were going to walk out of the room.
It's incredible to hear Allahu Akbar shouted in the middle of this university.
And what does that represent, Megan? The subjugation of women, the torture of homosexuals, the torture of Christians, the crucifixion of Christians. That's what it has come to represent, and that's what they're shouting.
Were you in touch with the embassy, or were you in touch with like any groups?
Pretty much all of the groups, not the embassy, I guess our consulate.
As well as the Israeli consulate in San Francisco, Julia's anti-BDS campaign had the guidance of several pro-Israel lobby groups.
Stand With Us helped us a little bit in terms of actual research on the speech. They gave us some like legal research type stuff. I'm always biased and want to work with AIPAC, so they kind of helped for like moral support. And David Project helped us a little bit. It was more help like gaining contacts in like the media world. I guess we needed money to pay for somebody to film the speech.
Despite the passing of the BDS motion, the governors of the university known as regents are under no obligation to abide by the students' vote.
As for that resolution to boycott Israel, well, UC Regents issued a statement saying they will not even entertain the idea.
After looking back on everything, I feel a little creepy because of what happened after the vote. People that were affiliated with the group just were smeared and had to deal with these very personal crises of the world calling us terrorists and the world thinking that we were this spiteful hate group. It's pretty unequivocal how organized they were, how brutal and ruthless that narrative was, and how it affected us in the end.
Outside AIPAC's 2017 annual conference, the first protesters were American Jews. AIPAC is facing a challenge from the constituency whose views it was formed to represent.
You do not represent the best of the Jewish prophetic tradition, and we here to bear witness to tell
One of the groups involved was Jewish Voice for Peace.
The work that Jewish Voice for Peace does is grounded in Jewish tradition, the most basic Jewish and human values, that every single person has inherent worth and dignity and should be treated with respect. We then see what's happening to Palestinians, the occupation, the displacement, the inequality, and say we need to end those things.
There were few pro-Israel demonstrators. Most wanted to project their strength through Israel's relationship with the United States. The Jewish Defense League, with its distinctive yellow insignias, was a small but threatening presence. Its members later attacked a Palestinian-American man.
I can't breathe! I can't move it!
American Jews are even taking their protest to Jerusalem. The Israeli government official who launched a covert campaign to spy on American citizens recognizes that Israel is facing a generational time bomb.
אנחנו היום, לא רק שאיבדנו את הדור השני של היהודים, שזה דור המילניום של היהודים, אני שומעת את זה מההורים שלהם שבאים להיפגש איתי ומסבירים לי כמה קשה להם בארוחות שישי מול הילדים שלהם. שלא מכירים במדינת ישראל ולא רואים בנו איזה אנטיטי שצריך להריץ אותו.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Fawn, and thank you for attending this live screening of the Lobby USA. This is a special one-hour cut prepared by one of the people involved in the creation of the documentary, Karen Holmes, who is present with us right now. And I also apologize if you saw some choppiness in the video. We will edit it and re-upload it in the YouTube channel, the same Verso Books YouTube channel, and you should be able to see it smoothly if you want to review it again tomorrow. And now that the screening has concluded, we are going to switch to a live panel discussion. We have with us Noah Kulwin, the co-host of the podcast Blowback, Corey Peterson Smith, the Middle East Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies, who was also featured in the film, Liz Jackson, Senior Staff Attorney at Palestine Legal, and Sumaya Awad, Director of Strategy at the Adalah Justice Project. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Noah. And if you have any questions, feel free to post it in the chat, in the YouTube chat. I want to introduce Noah, who is the co-host, as I mentioned, of the political history podcast Blowback. He's an editor at The Drift and Jewish Currents. He's written for the New York Times, New York, Baffler, New Republic, and many other publications. So please take it away, Noah.
Hi. First, I just want to say thank you to Karen Holmes for asking me to be on this panel, and to all of the event sponsors for putting this on, to Sumaya Awad, Liz Jackson, Corey Peterson Smith for participating, and everybody tuning in online. So thank yous all around. The first thing I want to do, for the sake of clarity, is to define some of what the viewers just saw in this portion of Al Jazeera's Lobby documentary, and to add some context around the edges. I apologize if I repeat things that others will be saying, or repeat some of what was in the movie. And then for the second half, I want to talk about the political dilemma posed by the Israel lobby vis-a-vis charges of anti-Semitism. Accusations of anti-Semitism as a way of diffusing, marginalizing, and attacking pro-Palestinian voices, and frankly Muslim voices more generally, are a difficult but not new challenge. But the immolation of the British Labour Party was, I think, a real wake-up call for people on the lookout for the political weaponization of anti-Jewish bigotry, as are the persistent campaigns against BDS supporters. And of course, one of the primary venues where literally millions of dollars get spent for this weaponization is on college campuses. So now to my first point, the Israel lobby. At large, what are its constituent parts, and how are they mobilized? Broadly speaking, outside of the college campus, the Israeli government operates, funds, and otherwise collaborates with friendly agencies and NGOs to get politicians and the media to do what they want. Think tank fellows who appear frequently on cable TV, no disrespect to Corey, anti-Trump and pro-Trump Twitter pundits. The Israeli government and its friends in the UAE and Saudi Arabia have helped nurture awful American bipartisan foreign policy, both on the airwaves and on Capitol Hill. AIPAC, quite famously, is the most effective bundler of money on behalf of pro-Israel politicians. Though nobody in Washington talks like it's greasy cash for influence lobbying, that's what it is. And this component of the Israel lobby helps explain why the Israeli government's agenda is never far from Washington's mind. But the lobby isn't just a force present in DC. As we know, part of what makes the lobby so powerful is that it can shape politics in state houses and universities around the country, with anti-BDS measures and fines for saying Free Palestine and so on. The anti-BDS laws, however, and the fines are a harder sell. They proliferate primarily in red states, though you can find them in Democratic strongholds. And they're very threatening, as I'm sure Liz Jackson can say more about, but they are difficult to enforce. And there was this recent federal court ruling striking one law in Arkansas. College campuses, though, where minds are molded and blah, 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 this is more nebulous and thorny territory. The facts are just as dark, frankly, and yet mostly the media and political establishment look the other way. Why? That's because if we were to talk about the Israel lobby on American campuses plainly, it would sound something like this. On college campuses, the Israeli government, through intermediaries and allied interests in the United States, has for years conducted campaigns of surveillance and suppression against left-wing and minority student activists on campuses across the U.S. As viewers just saw, Julia Rifkind, an Israeli embassy staff member, told Al Jazeera's reporter that she gathered intelligence and then kicked this intel to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the recently shuttered Ministry of Strategic Affairs. To do this work, she used methods like creating false social media profiles to join Palestinian solidarity groups like one at Texas A&M University. The Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs no longer exists, but it was, when it functioned, a hub for coordinated action against Palestinian solidarity movements around the world. If this were Russia, there would have been congressional hearings by now, Magnitsky Act sanctions against the Russia on Campus Coalition associates, and likely some very dramatic headlines in the New York Times and Washington Post. Shadowy Russian ministry funds NGOs that spy on American college students. You get the idea. The most galling tendril of the Israel lobby, perhaps, though, is Canary Mission, an anonymously run blacklist website that has targeted SJP activists, Muslims, and anti-Zionist Jews. I'm sure it's familiar to many of you. But while some of the intermediaries for these really heinous actions are groups like the Israel on Campus Coalition, who are in turn tolerated, if not nurtured, by more mainstream American Jewish umbrella groups like Hillel International. It is here that I want to turn to my second point. In 2018, The Forward reported that one of Canary Mission's major donations was from a Jewish philanthropist routing it through the San Francisco Jewish Federation. The chairman of the board of the Israeli so-called charity, discovered to be operating Canary Mission, was the Bay Area mega landlord Jacqueline Safier, who at the time of The Forward's reporting sat on an advisory board to UC Berkeley leadership. Also earlier this year, she was teaming up with the UC Berkeley to evict people in the pandemic. I learned this today as well. And a former board chair of this charity had also once been Richard Rosenberg, an ex-CEO of Bank of America. So just what I'm saying simply is this. Some of the most extreme action against Palestinian activism on campuses has not just come from the Israeli government and puppet groups and lanyards in DC. It's coming from the pockets of some of America's most wealthy and powerful people who are doing so in their capacity as the stewards of America's largest, oldest, and most well-capitalized Jewish institutions. When I was a student at UC Berkeley, I got involved on campus Israel-Palestine politics through J Street U. There was a divestment vote, and I took the wrong side at J Street, on the side of J Street U. And simultaneously, we fought to be recognized by the Jewish Student Union at Berkeley Hillel. And I guess just to tie this up, it was at Berkeley Hillel and in these mainstream Jewish venues that I encountered and directly, interacted with Israeli diplomats and all sorts of different groups receiving funding and doing all sorts of programming that you saw in the documentary just now. So in short, it is the mainstream Jewish community position, the one with funding and political muscle behind it, that puts diaspora Jews on the wrong side of Israeli apartheid as a moral issue. And the active self-conflation with Jewish and pro-Israel has become a devastatingly effective rhetorical weapon. The stench of anti-Semitism is now a pretext for many of the worst actions that you saw in the lobby documentary because of the united front that gets demanded around, Jewish unity and defining what's appropriate for Jews and what's not, and charges of anti-Semitism that result from, this united front. I mean, it's effectively, the fiction is that if a majority of press releases from Jewish organizations say something is anti-Semitic, then it's anti-Semitic. And so now I think that this tension, having revisited the documentary today after viewing it for the first time in some time and sitting with some of the events of the last year, that was sort of what I was weighing with and wanted to contribute. So I'm sorry if I went over long. I wasn't sure what the time was. Didn't have a timer going, but thank you.
Thanks, Noah. It was totally fine. That was Noah Kulwin, co-host of the podcast Blowback. Up next is we'll be hearing from Corey Peterson Smith. Corey is the Michael Ratner Middle East Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. He researches and writes about U.S. militarism and foreign policy in the Middle East with special focuses on the struggle for Palestine and the war on terror. He is a founding member of Black for Palestine, and you also just saw him in the documentary. So, Corey.
Thank you. And I've got to say thank you, Noah, for those remarks, for your clarity, for your honesty, and yeah, gratitude that you're on this side now and we're all on the same side here. And just gratitude to Verso Books for everything you do every day to promote left politics in this country and around the world, and for hosting this tonight. Gratitude to my fellow panelists, Noah, Sumaya, Liz, Karen, for this incredible film. The organizations represented here, Jewish Currents, Palestine Legal, Adalah Justice Project. This is like a really special gathering, so I'm really honored to be here. So I want to talk about this film and the work that we're talking about tonight in light of just this year, 2021, and just start with a bit of a step back by saying, Israel supporters for a long time have made the claim, Israel supporters here in this country have made the claim that in executing US policy, a policy that, US foreign policy is in general indefensible, I would argue, but that has a special relationship with Israel, that gives Israel a privileged status. The argument has been that actually the majority of people, of Americans, support Israel, and that this is just executing the kind of democratic will of the US population, that it's in line with our values, et cetera. Now that's false. For many reasons, the US isn't a democracy. I think that's especially clear when it comes to US foreign policy. It is far from an expression of, the popular will of the US population or whatever. But it's false for a number of reasons. And one is actually that far from the notion that the US population has, been educated on the question of what's happening in Palestine and is therefore making a decision to support Israeli apartheid. Actually, the contrary is true, that a tremendous amount is invested into obscuring the reality of what is happening in Palestine to the US population in particular. And actually that what Israel does and what the US does in supporting Israeli apartheid really depends on these things remaining largely invisible to the US population, actually. It is, I think, for obvious reasons in the interest of Israel and of the US government and Israel supporters that Israeli apartheid itself, the daily colonial violence against Palestinians in Palestine and around the world, for obvious reasons, they want that to be invisible. They don't want us to see that at all, those of us who are not Palestinian. Frankly, they don't want any Palestinian visibility at all. And also the infrastructure that exists in this country to support what is a level of US prioritization of Israel that I think Israel needs, frankly, to do what it does. Not just in terms of the kind of weapons sales, bankrolling the Israeli weapons industry and Israeli society financially, but diplomatically, how the US goes to bat all the time for Israel to cover for its abuses in Palestine and elsewhere. Israel depends on that. And there is an infrastructure here to assure that kind of thing keeps happening, that they want invisible as well. This is why, if you are or have been a student and you have tried to find out if your university is invested in Israel, they are not open about that. They're very cagey on every campus in this country, right? That's not accidental. They want to keep those things obscured. So crucially, I think the lobby itself, what was detailed in this documentary, that this lobby that suppresses criticism of Israel, that is meant to be invisible. And that's why this documentary is so extraordinary. Every time I watch it, it's just unreal what is revealed there. So that's the background. And I think, and I say this with a kind of trepidation and a kind of hope. I think that 2021 is a really important year when it comes to actually building Palestine solidarity in this country and challenging US support for Israel. The trepidation is because so much of why this year is a turning point is because the level of Israeli violence is just so severe. And frankly, they're gearing up for more violence. That's horrifying. But I say it with hope because I've actually been heartened by what I see as a new conversation in this country about Israel, about Palestinians, and about US support for Israel. I think so much of that has to do with last year, when we had the largest protest wave in US history, these Black-led uprisings that were about racism and were not only about interrogating the incidents of what happened in Minneapolis with the murder of George Floyd or in Louisville with the murder of Breonna Taylor, but we're actually about interrogating something deeper. I think really we're getting at the racist nature of this country. It was a conversation where we're talking about the history of policing rooted in slave patrols. It was a conversation where that produced finally the end of the Confederate flag as part of official state flags in certain parts of this country, right? This pointed towards something much deeper. And it opened a lot of eyes in this country. And with those same eyes, I think a lot of Americans saw what happened in May in Palestine, first in Jerusalem. They saw the police abusing Palestinians at the Al-Aqsa Mosque and saw the police pushing people out of their homes in Silwan and in Sheikh Jarrah. And they said, this is messed up and also this looks familiar. I've seen police that act like that. And a lot of people were not surprised then to find out that's not a coincidence. Actually, Israeli police and American police train together, right? Yeah, I think that this is a context for a new conversation in the US. It is the context for Ben and Jerry's decision to say, you know what, we can no longer, we cannot square with our values selling our products in the occupied Palestinian territories. That was the context. And then it's the context for Israel's reaction, which I think has only further revealed the infrastructure that they have built, particularly when the Israeli ambassador to the US says, I am reaching out to 35 governors so they can follow through on legislation in 33 states in this country targeting boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign. That's a revelation. A lot of people don't know that they have been quietly passing anti-BDS legislation state by state. Shout out to Palestine Legal for tracking this and always calling attention to it. And now a lot more people know. So whatever. Thanks to the Israeli ambassador, I guess, for calling attention to that, and really for, I think, putting the ball in our court to say, what are we going to do about this? Because they're revealing this. And I think that means that now is the time for us to push. I think that what we're in is Israel's nightmare scenario, actually, where we have, first of all, after years and decades of work led by Palestinians themselves, we actually have Palestinians in this country in a different position to speak for themselves about what is happening. We have Ayman Mohyeldin at MSNBC, who knows a thing or two about what's happening in Palestine. And when Israel bombs Gaza, can speak to that. And can question guests, right? We have Nora Erekat, who gets interviewed on CNN to comment on what's happening in Palestine, right? So that's one thing. And we have a racial justice movement in this country that is not only reframing and educating people about anti-Black racism, about anti-Asian racism in this country, about anti-Indigenous racism and colonization, but is also informing how people look at Palestinians and people all around, other people around the world who are on the receiving end of the violence that the US carries out and supports. So, I think that they put these anti-BDS measures in place as insurance against this precise moment. And I think that it is our time now to push. The more this becomes visible, the more it's in our favor as people who support the rights of Palestinians, right? I actually have faith that the US population, if they knew more about what was happening, they would be appalled and they would want to take action. And we're seeing that this year. So we should have faith in that too. That was true last year when it came to Black Lives Matter. When people, I think when people saw that video of George Floyd being murdered, it did something. And once it was revealed, people were compelled to act. And I think that the more people in this country see what's happening in Palestine, see it, they are compelled to act. So it's on us to push. Campuses are crucial for that. That is why they invest so much in making sure that we don't know what's happening on campuses and campuses' investment in Israeli apartheid. But we should take that investment on their part as an endorsement or a vote of confidence in our ability, in how important what our work is, actually. If what we do wasn't so important, they wouldn't work so hard to counter it, right? So I know this is a difficult time. It's a difficult time in Palestine. But I really do believe that we are a year closer to ending US support for Israel, and that means a year closer to a free Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey Peterson Smith, Middle East Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. Up next, we have Liz Jackson. Liz is a founding senior staff attorney for Palestine Legal. Her work focuses on building a network of movement lawyers to support activists organizing for Palestinian freedom and related justice movements. She defends the right to boycott, bolsters the free speech rights of students, professors, and activists, documents the chilling effects of repression campaigns, and creates ways for lawyers to strengthen movements for liberation. Take it away, Liz.
Thank you so much to Verso and to the producers of this really incredible, shocking documentary, and to all of you for this discussion. I think I want to just start by, repeating what, how intense what we're seeing in this documentary is. So at Palestine Legal, I'm really dealing with this stuff day in and day out. We do legal support and advocacy for people in the US who support Palestinian freedom. Our role is to bolster the movement, like my bio said. And so we're providing legal advice and know your rights support. We're tracking this stuff. We're following and studying the legislation, and we're getting calls every day from people who are fired from their jobs because of Canary Mission, who are being surveilled, harassed, really ugly cyberbullying where people have to be in safe houses, and the whole gamut. And the personal harms are intense, and I want to talk about that if I have time. And even so, even though I'm doing that every day in this office, I still find this documentary shocking. And the piece that even though I've seen it before and I know this, I just really want to point out how crazy it is that these operatives are bragging about the fact that they are trailing people with basically state-supported surveillance, are creating fake news, creating infrastructure to put fake news on blast and harass people. And that line at the beginning where, what's his name? Jacob Bain says, this is so effective because they either, these anti-Israel people either shut down or have to spend their time responding. And that's less time that they can attack Israel. And this is psychological warfare, that they're bragging about this. And there's a huge apparatus to enact this psychological warfare. And after this documentary came out, where was the condemnation? And I'm actually, I think maybe Karen can speak to that, but I would like for all of us to hear again about what was the reaction to this documentary, aside from it being censored via state apparatus. What happened to, where was the condemnation among liberal Zionists or people who supposedly kind of find this tactic to be a little distasteful? What was the reaction? Because and I'm so grateful to Verso for trying to recirculate this, because it really needs more. The ugliness here does need more attention. I wanted to give a quick zoom out quickly, just to give an overview of the scale. I think I saw Dr. Bazian in the comments say this just scratches the surface. That's also true. This is a deep view into the Israeli Zionist actors who are enacting this repression infrastructure. But this 1 hour excerpt doesn't give the broad overview of the scale. So this kind of attack to create fake news, to create character assassination campaigns with false accusations of anti-Semitism and terrorism, to constantly recycle and put this on blast and really pummel people with intense hate and harassment campaigns to exhaust and drain them, and weaken them and distract their resources. And then the intense lobbying to institutions like universities, university administrators, pummeling on repeat with completely false and baseless accusations to obscure the message and to just bury what people are trying to talk about, which is equality and justice and freedom and rights that we're all entitled to as humans on the planet, to just bury that message with a different message of anti-Semitism and terrorism, which successfully gets universities to repress and censor in violation of their own rules and fundamental norms of academic freedom and such, and then also create a whole national apparatus of state legislation that punishes another sort of like fundamental American right to boycott and protest for civil rights. And then, of course, also gets the state to enact criminal investigations and state-sponsored surveillance. This whole apparatus is happening sort of really everywhere. It's universal in the US and is triggered and kind of levied against pretty much anyone who dares ask a critical question about Israeli policy or who vocally advocates and demands and organizes for Palestinian freedom. It's routine, this backlash. And it's since Palestine Legal formed really to respond to this, and we started counting incidents. We keep a tally, and I'm pretty sure by now we're past 2,000. We started counting in 2014 of just people who contact us asking for support because they're being harassed or attacked or legally bullied in some way. And this spring, of course, was very intense, as people in the US and, around the world and also in the US reacted to Israel's intensified colonial violence and the bombings in Gaza. Again, I think this Bill Mullen professor is quoted as saying this, of course, people can, the lobby in the US cannot react by defending the bombing of Gaza. Instead, they just react with character assassination attempts. And I think, what did Bill say? Trying to make our lives miserable, they can try to destroy our lives, but they can't defend the bombing of Gaza. So this really intensified this spring. And Palestine Legal then in turn, really, we saw a very clear uptick in the intensity and scale of repression with basically, campaigns targeting corporations, a lot more people fired, a lot more accusations of anti-Semitism and terrorism, and people who, beyond the kind of usual suspects of campus activists, but really regular folks saying this is wrong on the internet in some form, are now kind of caught up and being fired and or otherwise targeted with harassment campaigns. So we've gotten a lot of calls from regular folks like Facebook, members of Facebook moms groups, or, a farmer, cook, people like that. So that's an interesting kind of, I would say, like a new trend in response to to the horrors of Israeli violence. Something else that I just want to pull out in my last moment here to react to is, did people notice how much these operatives interviewed dropped the T word, the terrorist word, just constantly in integrating, and that's just really dehumanizing social justice, freedom, equality activists into violent people, and just being able to invoke all of the racist state violence threats against people by using the T word, and how often that is part of the scare and how intimidating that is, and how much that does drain people, because it's such a terrifying accusation with the state apparatus behind it. And then the other piece that I think I said this already, but just to be a little more specific about it, I hope people saw in here how integrated the different tactics are. So there'll be this, on the one hand, like anonymous websites, and then a targeted Facebook ad campaign sort of pummeling someone, and how that is the creation of a false story that this certain type of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is all over, and there's an epidemic. And then the way that narrative justifies state legislation, yes, of course, federal, criminal investigations, or official institutional censorship, and then of course how that generates self-censorship. That all of these tactics really work together. And I think I'm out of time, but I guess I'll just tag that the personal harm that people experience is really intense, and lives are ruined. And that's one reason why, as I rewatch this again, I think about how shameful how after this documentary, after this became so clear to watch operatives bragging about this, how little condemnation there was, and that this is a little bit outdated now. A lot these tactics have only increased and only increased their institutional power since then. And then just as a final comment to end on a better note, despite the very painful personal harm that people suffer, this movement in the US is only growing. And that actually this will not work. And our task, I think Palestine Legal's really main mission now, and all of us, is to take this repression and really use it. Because what is Israel and its lobbyists and its proxy organizations, what are they trying to hide and crush, and really get under there to elevate, just the same message of why we're here, for freedom for all people. And that is growing, and that has only grown since this documentary. So yeah, and this event helps us do that. So I'm grateful to be in the conversation.
Thank you, Liz Jackson, Senior Staff Attorney at Palestine Legal. Up next is, and this is our final speaker for this panel, Sumaya Awad. Sumaya is a Palestinian writer and organizer focusing on Palestine, Islamophobia, immigration, and labor. Sumaya is currently Director of Strategy at the Adalah Justice Project and the co-editor of Palestine, A Socialist Introduction. She's also a member of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. And take it away, Sumaya.
Thanks so much. I'm sitting by the window and it's pouring rain. So if it gets to the degree where you can't hear me because of the rain, please let me know in the chat. Thanks so much for having me. I echo all of the thanks that the three previous speakers expressed, and in some ways feel like I have little to add after all that brilliance, but I'll do my best to offer some tidbits that haven't been touched on. The first thing that actually came to mind when Liz was speaking, Liz, you mentioned, how much they rely on lies, and how lies are sort of used to, it doesn't actually matter what the truth is. Right, that this disinformation can be used to pass legislation, to ruin people's lives, etc. And one thing that I think is very apparent in the film is how there is no concern, there is no interest in the truth on the side of not just Israel lobby, but Zionist groups in general, certainly the Israeli government. And that's reflected in several ways, and I want to mention three. The first is that there's no real interest in fighting anti-Semitism, in what is actually anti-Semitic, right? It ends up being all of these lies and smears and weaponization of anti-Semitism against people calling for freedom, calling for rights, things that are liberatory for Jewish people as well. So that's the first. The second is the way that disinformation smears, harassment, the rewriting of people's actions and people's words, to spin this whole new story about what they're fighting for, right? That no matter what Palestinians say and their advocates say and do, they're going to be labeled as violent, as instigators, regardless of what format, what form, what they're doing comes in. And that's the second. And then the third is that there is no mention of what Israel's actually doing. And I think like in all of the snippets from the lectures and the little, the conferences in the movie that the different organizations held, different aspects of the Israel lobby, no one actually talked about or mentioned what Israel is doing in Palestine, right? There's no mention of Israeli apartheid. There's no attempt to talk about where that comes from, why these campus groups are saying what they say. There's no questioning that at all. And so as Liz and others said, the conversation becomes not about what do we do with Israeli apartheid? What do we do about the fact that this is settler colonialism? What do we do about the fact that Gaza is an open air prison, that people are being killed every day, that children are being detained, and that we're funding it with US tax dollars? And instead it's about, is this or is this not anti-Semitism? So I wanted to point those three out because I actually hadn't thought of it that way until I watched this again and sort of heard the other speakers. And the second point I want to talk about is who's being targeted. I think the film shows this a bit, but it's important to remind ourselves that the people being targeted, the students, they're students, right? They're people in college. Think about what it was like when you were in college, that are trying to understand the world, trying to understand their politics, trying to understand what it means to build with other people and to engage with ideas and build who they are and how they want to interact with the world. And instead what they find is that there is a group of people that are very well funded that is essentially trying to isolate them from society, right? Because that's what things like Canary Mission do, and the Maccabee Task Force, and others that were mentioned in the film. The goal is to shame these students and to make them feel afraid and to make them bow out of the work that they're doing, the very heroic, the very incredible work that they're doing. And that's who they're targeting. And, I haven't checked Canary Mission in a while, but a couple years ago when people sort of combed through the profiles, you could see that the majority of them are people of color. Many are women. Majority were Muslim. Again, I'm not sure what it is right now, but that was it at the time. And that's no coincidence, right? They're targeting the most vulnerable people on campus, the ones that are easiest to isolate, easiest to smear. And that leads me to my second point, which is the role of Islamophobia in all of this, and particularly after 9/11. And Liz touched on this with how the T word is just thrown around at anyone and everyone that is involved in SJP or Palestine advocacy. You're either labeled that or you're labeled a sympathizer, right? And often the sympathizer is thrown at anti-Zionist Jewish groups and individuals who are doing this work. And that's what Canary Mission does, right? Every profile will label someone as a sympathizer or an advocate of violence, etc. And I think that's really important because it's part of this whole war on terror narrative of if you're labeled the T word, anything against you is justified. No questions asked. It's okay. We can do it. And I think that played a big role in one, Canary Mission and how it frames all of the people that are profiled, but also the responses on campus, and specifically from campus administrations. Campus administrations are not just idly sitting by watching this take place. They're actually complicit in the crackdown on Palestine solidarity activists. SJPs have had funding withheld, their events canceled. Members were forced to attend civility and dialogue trainings, had their activities confined to free speech zones, etc. And that was because of the pressure the campus administration faced. And also, of course, it's important to mention that campus endowments are, a lot of them are invested in the military and have connections to business interests abroad. And that leads me to my next point. I'm trying to be quick because I'm realizing I'm running out of time. which is that it's really important to really reject any attempt to paint this as an actual fight against anti-Semitism, and see it for what it is, which is that the U.S. government just has geopolitical and business interests in the Middle East, right? In many ways, it's nothing new. There's nothing exceptional about it. But there's this whole narrative, and I think what Noah started with sort of explains why, in this particular case, they've been able to get so far in the clampdown against Palestine solidarity activism and the Palestine movement in general. And I won't go into that too much because I'm running out of time. But I do want to end on a high note. And as Liz said, the movement is growing. The attacks are as well. And I think Ben & Jerry's is an example of that. The fact that they were able to say, we're going to introduce legislation in all 50 states, don't buy Ben & Jerry's ice cream, et cetera. Or, the what happened with Cornel West at Harvard. But I think that these attacks show that the movement is growing and that overall the ideological battle, we're winning it, right? More and more people are becoming anti-Zionist. More and more people are questioning Israel and unconditional funding to Israel and Israel's actions. And part of that has to do with what Kari was talking about, the fact that there's a left growing in the US, that people are also questioning other things that they had sort of taken for granted. And I think part of that too is just that these long accepted dogmas about Zionism and about Israel are just falling apart. And this is reflected in more BDS wins. This is reflected in the fact that there are sitting members of Congress that openly support BDS. This is reflected in organizations like Movement for Black Lives or movements like Movement for Black Lives openly endorsing, engaging in and pushing for BDS and for Palestinian freedom. And that there's this shifting consciousness that's happening in the United States. And it's particularly important in the US. There's a reason Israel is so focused on the US. And that's because the US, it's not just funding. Funding is a big part of it, that $3.8 billion. Israel also gets money from elsewhere and has its own economy that's booming, frankly. But it's because of the diplomatic support and cover that the US provides Israel. And as a result, that other countries are able to just stay quiet while Israel continues to do what it does. And we've seen that Biden has shown absolutely no indication of shifting things. But there is a narrative shift. There is a shift in consciousness. In May, I think it was in May or June, where a poll came out showing that 25% of Jewish Americans call Israel an apartheid state or recognize Israel as an apartheid state, right? That's a shift where a few years ago that was not the case. I think that we are at this juncture where it's very important for us to push further, and there's an urgency to it because I don't think we're going to have this opportunity for too long. And I also think that there is so much potential for the BDS movement, for the Palestine movement in the US. And so, if you're on a campus, this is the time to join an SJP or to launch a BDS campaign, or at your workplace. Labor is growing in the US very slowly, but growing. And there's a lot of potential in thinking about what BDS resolutions could look like in unions across the US. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Sumaya Awad, Director of Strategy at the Adalah Justice Project. So you've just heard from four panelists, Noah Kulwin, Corey Peterson-Smith, Liz Jackson, and Sumaya Awad. And we're now entering the Q&A portion of this talk for the next half hour. And I'd like to start off, get the conversation going with a few comments, trying to synthesize what the four of you have been talking about, as well as what we just saw in the documentary. One thing that really strikes me with the documentary is that when you watch it, and anyone who has been involved in activist organizing around Palestine at a college campus for any significant amount of time will recognize a lot of things, these themes that recur and these actions that keep happening. You realize that you're not alone, that what happened on your campus happened on all these other campuses. The kind of weird actions which just almost like a caricature and just so surreal about what's happening and how people will misinterpret or deliberately reinterpret your words, attack you, and then say that they've been victimized and do all these dirty tricks like Noah was talking about, just dirty tricks. And you just wouldn't believe, like, I know this person, and they smile in front of my face, and then I find out they've been like trying to destroy my life behind my back. And it's just so often. And one thing that we don't do that the other side does a lot, and when I'm talking about the pro-Israel side, is every single slight, real or imagined, becomes documented, becomes publicized, becomes front page news. Every single slight. And for us, we just accept it. And because we don't, we see a struggle and we start fighting the struggle, and we don't talk about ourselves and how it's affecting us, and how it's and how we're being impacted by it, because we don't think about it as being about us. It's being about the struggle. And for them, it's always about them. And you know, in the documentary where they talk about this is a battlefield, we have foot soldiers, and that's, if you look at the you know, news reports from decades back, this has been a recurring theme among the pro-Israel crowd. They always refer to the campus as a battleground, a battlefield, a campus war with foot soldiers. It's always this kind of war aspect that, you know, we're going to war. And yet they send off these soldiers that they've trained. You know, for instance, Stand With Us trains its Emerson's fellows. I don't know if they still do it, but they used to fly them all to California, hang out at a beach house with owned by Stephen and Rita Emerson, wealthy people. And then they have all these, you know, crazy tactics like say, be sure to use the word peace more than the other side. If you use the word peace more often, you will win. Those are the kind of things that they, you know, they engage in. And so you see, they send them off to battle. And then when they arrive at the campus, all of a sudden they go, oh, my feelings are hurt. My feelings are hurt. And I kind of equate it to like a Zionist Karen. And I apologize to Karen Holmes and all the other good Karens out there, but this is a very Karenistic tactic in which, first, they get offended when you try to like do something that should be totally legitimate and totally fine and totally acceptable and actually totally praised. When you're fighting for human rights, you're fighting against racism, and all of a sudden, the Zionist Karen says, oh, I'm offended, this hurts my feelings, this is not right, and then they call 911. In this case, instead of 911, they complain to the college administrators. They always go to the college administrators, or they try to pass legislation to ban whatever it is you're doing. And with all of that in mind, I often check I read a lot of Jewish press, and that is like press geared towards American Jews and also Israeli press. And one thing I'm seeing right now is, you know, there's a recent report, 95% of respondents in a survey identified as anti-Semitism as a problem on US college campuses. And then you also find all these articles preparing Jewish college students for what is in store when they arrive at campus. It's going to be hell. It's going to be like disturbing, you know, anti-Semitism everywhere you go. You know, do you have a bodyguard yet? You know, you're going to camp, you're going to college alone. So they already put the fear in you. If you're a Jewish student, an incoming Jewish student, they already put the fear in you. And this report that 95% of Jewish students surveyed identified anti-Semitism as a big problem on US college campuses that's making the rounds right now. It was conducted by a group called Alums for Campus Fairness, which is actually a front group for the Israel Emergency Alliance, AKA Stand With Us. And, you know, and the survey itself is totally flawed. If you look at the methodology, you find that it was not a random sample of Jewish students. It was a very targeted sample of people who follow their social media. So it was a totally right-wing ploy. And you see all of this a lot. And so what I'm trying to say is that there's this whole system, when we're looking at what all of you have been saying and what we see in the documentary, is that this whole system where they are treating it like a war, but when they show their face in front of everyone, they talk about themselves as being hurt. And you don't see a foot soldier. You see someone who needs to be coddled and comforted and protected from the evils of BDS. And so I'd like to hear from you all. If you can talk about this kind of weird bifurcation between, you know, them being very proactive and very targeted and very top-down, not grassroots like us, you know, hence the AstroTurf, very top-down in being sent and given rhetoric and given words on what to say and how to act and how to feel, and how this manifests and how it's a recurring theme that we see, you know, people who have attended colleges years back to people attending college now, we all have been facing the same thing whenever we fight for Palestinian rights. And if you can talk about that kind of onslaught and the way that they wield that onto college campuses, and how should we deal with that? If you're college student who wants to fight for Palestinian rights, but know that, they want to make life miserable for you and they want to ruin your career before it's even started.
An example that I would jump to and give is when I was in high school on a program that brought me to Israel. I was subject to a presentation by the David Project, and one of the things that I really remember about it was frankly the millenarian vibe that came with the presentation about what life was like for Jews on college campuses. And I think that the invention of that, this aggressive effort at a sort of predisposition, is incredibly powerful. And the reason that it is, even though we have all been subject to or participated, adjacent to, party to this dynamic in some fashion or another, it's cracking because the world in which it made sense doesn't quite make sense anymore. And I think that is really, really it's due to stuff out of any movement or individual's control, but it's because I don't think that people can have credibly told the lie about what Jews have a good time at college. The UC campus survey on discrimination, when it looked at reports of anti-Semitism, if you actually read it, it was fine. And I'd Mark Udoff, the UC president at the time, who'd was a real, a lawyer with a stick up of his ass. He wasn't particularly helpful or useful in terms of guiding how these things should be packaged. And then, it's the facts never have a chance to make their day because it wasn't convenient. And while, the world and the broader political structure in which this stuff makes sense may be changing, I think that it still remains inconvenient to people in power. And so, as long as there remains this, alignment institutionally speaking, you're always going to have this, this what feels like frankly a herpetic discursive recurrence.
Yeah, and I wanted to connect what you said, Fan, to Sumaya's point earlier about the really disturbing disregard for actual truth. And, watching the Brandeis Center lawyers totally acknowledge and then just run right over and dismiss and pretend they didn't hear it. The Jewish professor and students from Knoxville saying, we do not have a rampant problem of anti-Semitism on our campus. And actually what they're really concerned about is Christian evangelism. That is the main concern of Jews here. She just thought that was funny, or I didn't quite get what she was saying at the bar, but she basically just was well, we're just going to ignore that. And then she testified on the floor of the state legislature. She gave a false testimony, which she knew was false. So anyway, that connecting that to what you're saying, Fan, about how there's this alarming teaching from mainstream mainstream Jewish Zionist institutions telling young Jews that you better watch out. That is an intentional disregard for the truth. And it's, as a Jewish mother, I feel really, really disturbed and scared by that. But what I want to, I think we all need to kind of we all need to really resist what we read in those false headlines. And kind of look for ourselves to the facts, like what you just said, Noah. Yeah, this UC survey, which was real data, big, huge sample size. Jews at UC across the University of California reported a stronger sense of belonging and comfort with the campus climate than other religious groups. And what in my personal experience, I know a lot of Jews, progressive Jews who, or people who were Zionists who actually came to campus, kind of got shocked by what they learned about Zionism and Israel, and had a period of, disequilibrium and cognitive dissonance and trying to understand what is really happening, and actually really changed their views. And there are a ton of Jews who don't really care about this issue that much, and many who are changing their minds, and many who just kind of feel good on campus. And it's really important not to believe those those stories and kind of step aside from the headlines there, and also not focus so much on how Zionists and Jews feel, because it is so I want to even stop there and turn the conversation to another topic without cutting anyone else off. But it's easy to spend all of our panels talking about how Jewish students feel. I'm guilty of that too.
Right. That's real. I do, like, if I could make a couple of points, one analytical and then one practical. So analytically, like, there is, like, one of the things that, like, Fawn, like, what you were laying out, like, one of the things that I think you're hitting on is there is this thing that Israel, that I think is part of Israel, which is this contradictory combination of, like, militarism and fragility. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and that's the kind of, it's like, we're surrounded by enemies. They're going to hurt us. So we're going to destroy them. You know what I mean? It's like, that has to be actually teased out analytically. And I do think that there's a translation to the kind of tactics here, prepare people for war, but then the actual messaging is about vulnerability, and it's mobilized in this cynical way. The practical point, so there's a bunch to say about that. The practical point is, there has been this conversation in the US about white fragility. I mean, like, Fawn, like you said, there's these Zionist Karens, right? Like, there's language actually to describe, white people in a position where there's a claim to vulnerability as a vehicle to actually advance state violence, right? So let's flesh that out and talk about the connections. I feel remiss if I didn't say, and this takes off of something Sumaya said, like, I am worried about, like, rising anti-Semitism. Like, I'm actually concerned, about what is happening, in terms of the desecration of Jewish cemetery. There's all kinds of, there's a problem, you know what I mean? But it's not being driven by the Palestine solidarity movement. And it's actually the kind of Zionist, claims of anti-Semitism are actively undermining, a real conversation about the myriad oppressions that are rising in this country, including anti-Semitism. And I'm concerned about that. So we got to figure this out. I just want to say that.
Okay, we have a question here. Let me read that here. Are the panelists hopeful about BDS's ability to transcend smears and legal restrictions by the Israel lobby and states passing anti-BDS legislation, or do you think it poses a real challenge for the movement?
I can start, go backwards. I mean, it definitely poses a challenge, right? Because it's an attack that's both on the federal, state, local level, and on the grassroots. And that's not nothing. That's a full-on sort of war on BDS, like others have mentioned. That said, the reality is that BDS is growing, that more and more people are won to the importance of BDS, the potential of BDS to not just shift the narrative and shift consciousness around Israel and Zionism, but also having, like, a material impact on the ground in Palestine, a material impact on Israel's ability to reproduce itself as an apartheid and settler colonial state. And so short answer is yes, I am very hopeful. And I think that the last year has shown that. I think the last few years have really made that clear. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing, voices expressing support and uplifting BDS and Palestinian liberation and freedom in places that, frankly, before you couldn't even utter the word Palestine. In New York, which has a very strong Zionist, organized Zionist presence. We have people in the New York State Assembly that are openly pro-BDS, that are openly trying to challenge all of those that attempt to smear and harass Palestine advocacy. And I think, you know, one of the most important things is that Palestine is no longer considered or seen or spoken about as this separate thing that is separate from the left, that is separate from the struggle against racism, struggle against climate change, struggle against sexism, that it's actually seen as part of all of that. That if you want to talk about racism and be taken seriously, then you have to talk about what Israel is doing to Palestinians. If you want to talk about climate change and be taken seriously, you're going to have to talk about the US military and the militaries it's propping up elsewhere around the world. And so I think that in particular is a massive shift in the last 5 years. And it's not a coincidence that it's happening as the left more generally is growing stronger. That said, I don't think that it means, you know, the battle's over. I think that we're just beginning. And there's a lot of work to be done in this coming period, but I definitely feel very hopeful about where the movement is going in the US.
Okay, I have a question here. What are the major strategies we can use for divorcing Judaism from Zionism? And as I ask this question, I also want to point out, because a lot of times when questions are posed about Palestinian activism, it does often go towards how do we make Judaism, or what do Jews think? And I'm not saying that the questioner, is doing any of these things, or that is a bad question. It's actually a good question that needs to be addressed. But of course, the questions often have to go to Jews, at the expense of discussing non-Jewish people of color and other experiences, Palestinians, and all the other parties that are involved in this. That it often returns to Jews. What do the Jews think? How do we change the way Judaism is expressed, and all of that? It's a necessary question, but we also have to think about how often that dominates the discourse. But with that in mind, it is a legitimate question. I would like to pose that to the speakers.
I think we need to continue, really, all of us, continue our own political education and with others about understanding how the roots of oppressions, and really understanding what anti-Semitism is and its myriad expressions, and how it has the same roots as anti-Black racism and anti-Asian violence and Islamophobia and all of it. It's all about power and stratification for, in a capitalist system, and to keep understanding those common roots and how they renew themselves and manifest in different ways. That education is, we all have to do that all the time, and understand that and learn from each other, and then repeat that, understand how diverse the global Jewish diaspora is. And, understand, for me, it's really about remembering that it does not make me any safer to have Israel as a homeland for Jews to go to. Jews need to be safe in every country where we live across the globe. And the way we become safe is through solidarity with other people. So just continued reminders and education about that.
So I want to pose another question, or another topic now. When we talk about the war on campus, or the fight on campus, or the things that various parties are doing to prevent dissemination of information on campus in a way that, where we are able to express ourselves, other current events that are happening right now include this movement against critical race theory. Along with that are these conversations on cancel culture, and also what Sumaya was talking about, which is how a lot of causes are interrelated, and that becomes a threat. It's for several years now, there's been this whole theme that intersectionality is anti-Semitic, that and there's been a concerted effort. It's been happening for a long time. It's become more formal, this discussion that intersectionality is evil. That's the bad thing. And then when the critical race theory thing started blowing up, all of a sudden you have people like Barry Weiss hopping on the bandwagon and saying critical race theory is bad for the Jews. You know, and of course she doesn't know what critical race theory is, but all of a sudden, you know, you see that there's this intersection. And then when you look at, like, say, the Florida legislation banning critical race theory being taught in public schools, you see that within the same, like maybe one sentence apart from that, where it says, thou shalt not teach critical race theory, or that, you know, that slavery was anything outside of just slavery itself and that it was a self-contained thing, you are not allowed to minimize the Holocaust. And you start thinking, what is the connection between the two? Are people minimizing the Holocaust and teaching, you know, critical race theory at the same time? What is going on here? Why does that exist in the same legislation? And some people might dismiss that as rhetorical, but it's actually intertwined because of all of these groups are interrelated, you know. Stand With Us, as you saw in the documentary, has its tentacles all over the place, just reaching out. You know, Stand With Us is a front, you know, has several front groups, and they consult with a lot of groups, and, you know, it's all related. And so they're imposing this big movement of canceling all of us. And it's the most giant, huge, biggest cancel culture machine. You know, when people talk about cancel culture, it's individuals, a lot of individuals feeling the same way and complaining. They don't talk about the organized cancel culture that's been around for a long time. And in fact, a lot of these people, you know, people like Barry Weiss or Carrie Nelson, who have signed on to these anti-cancel culture petitions, are ones who are committing the greatest cancel cultures of all time. And of course, you know, if you read Barry Weiss's book, she complains that she heard from someone who said they wouldn't date a Zionist. And all of a sudden, that's trouble. So can you talk about this war on intersectionality, which is also has been a long time Zionist war and also a major mainstream Jewish organization war against ethnic studies curricula, ethnic studies programs that's been happening for decades, that they were opposed to these ethnic studies programs, and now it's gone over to CRT and this fight against, you know, talking about race in any kind of rational way and fight against intersectionality. Can you talk about how we deal with that and how we make these connections and deal with this big right-wing juggernaut of which Zionism, the pro-Israel lobby, is a part of it, a significant part of it that plays a role? Or not?
Okay, no, I have so many thoughts, so I'll try to keep it short. One, I just think it's really, so these concepts that there are these frameworks that you're talking about on, you know, intersectionality and critical race theory. I think it's very significant that these which were developed by radicals, you know, were quite on the margins, are actually part of like mainstream political discourse in the US, is actually a really powerful sign of the maturation of like a kind of progress in this country. I mean, like intersectionality, right, is like developed by like Black feminist scholars and advanced by Black feminist activists, and now it's just a mainstream conversation. And then critical race theory, now also, you know, this is not, anyway, the fact that it's very significant, and I think it bodes well for the kind of maturation of, you know, of certainly of a left, but really of even just public conversation in this country. So that's really good. I also think that it's a real, it's such a revelation actually about Zionism that that Zionism is so aligned with the anti-CRT, anti-ethnic studies ethos. I mean, there's this notion that you can be a liberal Zionist or progressive Zionist, which is just false. And that has always been false, but I think that, you know, now, I mean, for Barry Weiss to claim an identity as, or, you know, political sort of whatever location as a liberal or progressive, but be sharing talking points with Tucker Carlson. You know what I mean? Like because be clear about like the anti-CRT stuff is like the far right you know what I mean, in this country. You just see how it goes. You know, you could be a liberal Zionist and it goes to like fascist real quick. So I think that's a revelation, actually, about what we're dealing with, and it really frames the whole Zionist project. And, you know, whatever, this might be obvious, but what is the purpose of you know, intersectional frameworks or critical race theory? They were developed at least by you know, scholars and thinkers, you know, and activists here to try to understand like this place, to try to understand on a deep level how race operates in this country, you can't understand U.S. society if you're not talking about race, you know, in a critical way, right? So the fact that Zionists are like, no, we can't talk about this, you know, again, it reveals something deep about the whole Zionist project, and that deep thing is colonialism. I mean, it's just a fundamentally colonial enterprise, and in a way that, you know, the anti-CRT people here in the U.S. embrace the colonial foundation of the U.S. So this is a revelation. They are revealing it for us. You know, thanks for the clarity.
And then the one other piece is, of course, if people in the US, and especially young people, learn about colonialism and actually connect, and young people of color learn about the histories of their own families and how their experience of race in the US and how that connects to Palestinians' experience. You know, Zionists understand that is terrifying for them because of the amount of solidarity that forms. And that is happening. And I saw a question in the chat about like, why so much focus on campuses? And I think that's a great critical question. And there needs to be a lot more focus on other youth communities and just communities everywhere. But one really powerful thing that is happening on campuses is young people learning about colonialism and all of its forms and connecting their experiences. And that is why we see in the documentary this insane thing about how they're trying to astroturf and recruit Black people to condemn BDS. It's like they're very aware of the incredible global power of global intersectionality and what that means of real solidarity among people of all kinds of histories of violence coming together to oppose Israeli apartheid. Like that will be the end of Israeli apartheid. And it's happening slowly but surely.
That's a question that I did want to address to people. It was the question that was posed that the emphasis on college campuses as a place of resistance organizing is somewhat limiting for grassroots organizations because ultimately only 10% of adults in the U.S. are enrolled. So why is there that emphasis on college campuses? And I'm wondering if anyone else has any comments to make in response to that.
I mean, I think that part of it in the US is that the other segments of society, it's been a lot harder to organize there and to mobilize people because of decades of repression, because of how weak the labor movement has been, because of how all these spaces were depoliticized, where there was an opening on college campuses where you could organize, where you could mobilize, where you could win people to new ideas and sort of engage in them in a setting where everyone was in the same space. And so I think that's one of the reasons that it's been so strong on college campuses in the US versus in other countries where it's been stronger in the labor movement or grassroots or faith groups, etc. That said, I do think there is a shift happening in the US where more and more we are seeing it off campus as well. In community groups, you know, the rise of DSA, we're seeing it now in different in other segments of society where people are organizing and politicizing, and there's this consciousness, the shifting consciousness that I mentioned earlier. So I think that will likely change in the coming years, but that's sort of an attempt at explaining why it's been strong on college campuses in the last 10 years, in particular 10, 20 years.
I'd also add that activism can follow money. And in the case of Israel-Palestine campus activism, you know, from both ends, I mean, in particular in the pro-Israel end, because of the politics of generational reproduction in the Jewish community, you have a situation where enormous amounts of money, regardless of the political situation, are spent on Jewish programming in college campuses. And because of pre-existing institutional arrangements necessarily, and things like birthright and so on, you have systems in place that are able to steer people and have them engage with Israel. From one end, people who are ordinarily very politically demobilized, all of a sudden, they're politically mobilized on one thing. If you've ever been to an AIPAC event, or as any person who will tell you, like, it's a room filled with people where they all say, this is my one thing, because they have cultivated they work very hard to cultivate that. And I think that is, to Sumaya's point, I think in time that will get more difficult, because I think that the hegemony of the campus experience, as like where political ideas go, is becoming one of these like I mean, I try to read Barry Weiss's book, but it's just not about things. It's about like being angry at Twitter, and like you don't there has been, well before there was Twitter, the best-selling books on the New York Times bestsellers page were all crazy right-wing books. Like the most listened to radio stations are crazy right-wingers, like nothing new under the sun, etc. So like that she's able to like spin a mountain of shit out of it, like is to her like the soapboxes, frankly, that she's been given since she was a kid. And so when you get to, I think, a place though where it's like, all right, once we've sort of shunted aside the fact that like you push aside that there are these people like yelling and so on, always about like, like Barry Weiss, I think like the other side of it though, that direct confrontation experiences like birthright and this sort of like, more casual kind of acquaintance with Israel, it's not happening anymore. And it's because of, again, to part of what Sumaya was, I think, getting toward, which is that like, like as I think the average person is developing with every single overlapping crisis, one after the other, a more integrated understanding of just exactly how fucked up the world is. Something as straightforwardly horrible as what Israel does to the Palestinians becomes less easy to assimilate even into like the most McKinsey sponge brain like of people. And that's something that, like, I wouldn't say it should, like, I think that it's a good environment. It's a thing in our favor environmentally, but the very reason that it's happening is because it's also like the facade of liberal Zionism as even a plausible path forward is gone. And that's like nobody, like it's what we have is, what we are left with is something that is, it's a big opportunity, but it's also much, it's hard to say. I don't even know. I wouldn't speculate like that, but it is not to me, it's just that like the rhetoric is getting amplified now, and it's going to naturally keep going in that direction, just because everybody of her ilk, especially, just has an incentive to mouth off it like that. And the most, if there's any bit of encouragement, I would argue, it's simply to just like not touch the poop, just to like hear no evil, see no evil. There's not like they're not winning any converts. This is not like a movement, even intellectually, that's generating any new ideas. It's just pure reaction with a variety of ways to make money attached to it. It's the same old story.
And with that in mind, I think this is a good place to conclude the program. I wonder if you all have any closing thoughts. Anything to send us away?
I have a call to action to everyone here to show this documentary to like 5 people you know. It has not gotten around enough, and I really want it to keep going.
Yeah, and I was going to say there's also, I did an episode on the podcast, True Anon, with Norman Finkelstein about it, and that was able to get circulated a bit. I think that part of what's really powerful in this documentary are just the straightforward revelations. And I think that like, even if you're looking for clips and stuff to disseminate, like, this is not conspiracy theory. This is not innuendo. This is not anti-Semitism. This is like reported fact that gives you and other people around you a better tools with which to make sense of the world.
I'll add just one last thing, which is, the best way to respond to these attacks and sort of fight back against the smears and everything that the movie shows is to organize, is to join a BDS campaign, join an SJP if you're on campus, figure out what if you can do anything at your workplace, in your community. There's so many ways to get involved, and that's really how ultimately we're going to be able to push back against all of these attacks.
Completely agreed, and it's such and it's like on one hand, watching this documentary, it informs us. You know, it's like what Fawn said earlier on, like, you know, you have this experience on your campus and you think it's just like the jerks, you know, in your Hillel or whatever, and then you're like, oh, this is actually a systematic thing coordinated by governments around the world. So it's like be informed but not discouraged, because again, we're seeing that despite the fact that they've created whole ministries to run this, they're not stopping the movement. The movement is growing. So we can take inspiration from that, even as we inform ourselves of what we're up against when it comes to fighting for Free Palestine.
I was just going to say, if I can jump in, I know I haven't been on the panel, but just that the limitations of this film are obviously that it's like now outdated, but also that it was only produced in a matter of like 3 months of someone being undercover as an intern, right? So like the depths of how much more is that cannot be exposed from undercover investigating of this lobby is like absolutely enormous. There was 3 months of an unpaid internship that exposed all of this, right? So we're not even like touching the surface, and Hatem made that point there. But also I've shown this film on college campuses around the country now. And I really have this kind of dual experience of not wanting to show it because I worry that it'll scare people out of organizing, and that people will see what's happening and say, I'm not going to organize against this like multi-million-dollar counterinsurgent apparatus, but that organizing is the response, and like that we cannot get distracted in our freedom work from continuing to fight for Palestinian liberation. And yeah, I just want to thank all of you all, not only for coming on the panel, but also for being at the forefront of this work, and just such appreciation for everything that you all do.
And with that said, I'd like to thank all of you. Karen Holmes, who prepared this special edit of the Lobby USA for us, as well as Noah Kulwin, Corey Peterson-Smith, Liz Jackson, and Sumaya Awad, panelists here who have provided us with a lot of information. Oh, I also want to make a point that people really should check out Palestine Legal, Liz Jackson's Palestine Legal. There's a lot of resources there, and you can find out more about the lobby shenanigans that have taken place. And there are reports that are lengthy reports of instances, just really weird occurrences and things that you just wouldn't believe would happen anywhere outside of a Kafka book that are taking place right now in the United States on college campuses. So do please check out Palestine Legal. I'd like to thank all of you for attending this. This event has been sponsored by the Adalah Justice Project, the Institute for Policy Studies, New Internationalism Project, Jewish Voice for Peace, Palestine Legal, and Verso Books. Thanks a lot, everybody. Keep fighting the good fight, and we will see y'all in the future. Bye.